Wyoming Territory, July 1872, dust whipped low across the dry plains just outside Rawlins as the sun dropped hard behind the hills, bleeding orange across the sky. Thunder Everhart reigned in his chestnut gelding, his eyes narrowing at the sight ahead. A young woman knelt on the side of the road beside a slumped older man. She had her hands planted on his chest, her brow furrowed deep. Her skirts were dirt-streaked. Her face showed more fear than hope. Thunder kicked his horse into a slow trot. "You need help," he called out, voice low but clear as he slid down from the saddle. The woman turned fast. Her eyes were wide and sharp, the color of wet earth. "He's burning up," she said, her hands trembling as she pulled back from the man's chest. "It hit him this morning. He cannot stand." I do not know what to do." Thunder nodded once, crouching beside the older man. The man's skin was flushed, his breathing shallow. Likely a fever from the water or an infection from something minor turned mean in this heat. "Water?" Thunder asked. "I gave him the last of it an hour ago," she said, voice breaking. "We were trying to make it to Rawlins. He wanted to see a doctor. We only have the one mule and it gave out 3 miles back." Thunder pressed the back of his hand to the man's forehead. "We need to get him out of the sun." "I have a horse. We can walk him to my ranch. It is closer than Rawlins. It's less than half a mile east." The woman hesitated, glancing toward her father. "You would do that for strangers?" Thunder looked up at her. "Of course." She blinked, the fear in her face softening just a little. "I am Della Ellery. This is my father, Walter." Thunder gave a short nod. "Thunder Everhart. My ranch is just past that ridge." Della helped him lift Walter into the saddle. Thunder walked beside the horse, steadying the older man as they moved slow across the prairie. Della walked beside him without a word, but her pace never lagged. She kept glancing up at her father, her jaw tight. When they reached the small ranch house, Thunder pushed open the door and guided the horse to a stop near the porch. "Go inside," he said to Della. "There's cool water in the kitchen. I will carry him." She looked like she wanted to fight him on it, but she nodded and stepped inside. Thunder lifted Walter from the saddle, the older man groaning faintly. Inside, he laid him on a cot by the window. Della stood nearby, clutching a tin cup of water. "He will be all right here," Thunder said. "I will ride for the doctor soon as the dark lifts." Della's hands trembled slightly as she passed the water to her father's lips. "Thank you," she whispered. Thunder watched her for a second longer than he meant to. Her face was pale but steady, her fingers gentle. She looked like she had not slept in days. He reached into the cupboard and pulled out a clean cloth. "Cool his forehead with this," he said. "I will get the fire going and something warm to eat." She took the cloth from him. "You live here alone," he nodded. "Has been mine the last 5 years." She looked around the small, tidy room. "It is peaceful here." Thunder gave a quiet hum and started on the fire. By the time the stew cackled in the pot, Walter had fallen into a deeper sleep. Della sat beside him, her head bowed. She had unpinned her hair and it fell in a loose braid over her shoulder. Thunder watched her for a moment, then set 2 bowls on the table. "Eat something," he said. "You need it." Della rose, moving slow like her limbs fought her. She sat across from him and took the bowl with a small nod. "I do not know what we would have done if you had not come by." "You would have gotten him there," Thunder said. "You have grit." Her lips curved faintly. "My father says the same." They ate in silence for a while, then Della set her spoon down and looked over at him. "Why did you stop?" He looked up. "You were kneeling by a sick man in the middle of nowhere. I could not ride on." She studied him. "Most would have," Thunder shrugged. "I am not most." Della looked down at her hands. "I was not sure anyone would come. He collapsed so fast. I thought I might lose him out there." Thunder's voice was quiet. "You did not." She blinked hard, then turned her gaze out the window. The wind had settled, the sky now clear and black. After a long moment, she said, "I have not slept since yesterday. May I stay here tonight? Just until the doctor comes, of course," Thunder said. He stood and grabbed a blanket, spreading it across the floor near the hearth. "Take my bed." "I will stay here." "I could not." "You can. You need rest. I would not offer if I did not mean it." Della looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight. Then she nodded, soft and grateful. "Thank you again." Thunder gave a small nod, then turned toward the hearth. That night, he lay on the floor staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rise and fall of her father's breathing and the quiet turn of Della shifting in his bed. He did not sleep. By dawn, the doctor from Rawlins had arrived. Thunder rode out before the sun topped the ridge. When he returned, Della was out front, hanging damp cloths on a line. Her dress sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her braid tucked under a scarf. She looked up when she heard the hooves. "The fever has not broken," she said before he could speak, "but he is resting." Thunder dismounted. The doctor brought medicine. He says the fever should break by tonight if all goes well. Della wiped her hands on her skirt. Her smile this time was small but real. "You did not have to do all this." Thunder met her eyes. "I wanted to." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and turned back toward the house. That evening, the fever broke. Thunder stood outside as the sun went down, leaning against the porch post. He heard the door creak open behind him. "He is going to be all right," Della said. Thunder looked over at her. "Good." She stepped closer. "I do not think I have ever met someone like you, Thunder." He gave a quiet laugh. "Not a lot of cowboys around. Not a lot of kind ones," she said, her voice soft but steady. Thunder's eyes met hers. "You do not have to go back to Rawlins right away. You can stay as long as you like." She hesitated. "I mean it," he added. Della looked at him, really looked. Then she smiled, slow and sure. "Then I think I will." And beside him, in the fading light, she stood a little closer than before. By the second morning, the house had shifted. Walter's fever had broken in the night, and a quiet air of relief settled over the rooms like a slow wind after a storm. Thunder stepped outside before first light, the chill still clinging to the grass. He moved toward the barn, saddle over one shoulder, boots soft in the dew. Inside, he checked the feed, ran a hand down Jasper's flank, then set to mending the broken hinge on the stall gate. The stillness let him think, though lately, his thoughts had a way of slipping toward the house more often than they used to. When he returned, Della was pouring water into the basin by the stove, sleeves rolled high, her fingers pink from scrubbing. She glanced up when the door opened. "I boiled the linens," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "and cleaned the cot. He's sleeping again." Thunder hung his hat near the door. "You didn't need to do all that." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." He nodded, then reached for the coffee pot. She watched him move, then leaned her hip against the counter. "How did this place come to be yours?" "Traded for it," he said after a moment. "Worked 6 seasons on a cattle drive out of Texas. Saved near everything I earned. The man who owned this land took sick, and his sons wanted town life. I bought it off them." She tilted her head slightly. "You ever think of leaving it?" "No, not even once." Thunder met her eyes. "Not when I've got the sky this big and the quiet to match." Della smiled at that, but it was different from the ones she'd given before, less polite, more knowing. "You're not what most folks expect when they hear cowboy." "Neither are you what I expected out on that road," he said, folding his arms. She raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "Someone less steady." "I grew up the daughter of a man who built wagons from nothing but iron and pine." "Steady comes early when you know the wheels might fall off if you get it wrong." Thunder shook his head, a low chuckle in his throat. "You talk like someone who's never been scared." "I've been scared plenty," she said, her voice softer now. "But scared doesn't stop the work needing doing." Thunder looked at her then, really looked. The firelight caught the edge of her cheek, the line of her neck. She seemed made of quiet strength, not the kind that shouted, but the kind that endured. That afternoon, Walter stirred more. Della helped him sip broth, her voice low and even. Thunder didn't hover, but he stayed close. He split wood behind the barn, then fixed the latch on the chicken coop. As the sun tilted west, he found her outside near the well, rinsing a shirt in the basin. "He'll be on his feet in a few days," Thunder said, leaning against the post nearby. "You'll be heading on soon, I reckon." She wrung out the cloth, her hands working slow. "I suppose we should. My aunt's expecting us in Rock Springs, but I don't know if she's still there." Last letter came before the snow. "You could wire ahead," he offered. Della hesitated, then looked up at him. "Truth is, I'm not sure I want to go." Thunder stayed quiet. "I've been moving from one place to the next since Mama died," she said finally. "Always chasing something better. But this land, your home, it feels like it doesn't want anything from me, just lets me breathe." Thunder's voice came low. "You could stay, if you wanted." She stared at him, her fingers still in the basin. "And do what? Whatever you like. Help with the hens, plant a garden, read in the shade." "You don't know anything here." Della studied him, her brow drawn. "It's not what I expected." Neither was finding you on that road, he said. She smiled again, slower this time, her eyes not leaving his. You talk like someone who doesn't mind change. I don't mind the kind that feels right. That night, the three of them ate together the first meal at that table not taken in worry. Walter's voice was weak, but his eyes were clearer. He watched the two of them with a quiet interest, then leaned back with a satisfied grunt. She takes after her mother, he said to Thunder. Strong-willed, quick to dig in. I figured as much, Thunder replied. Della just shook her head, but there was a flush in her cheeks she didn't try to hide. After supper, Thunder stepped outside to mend a fence rail that had split in the last wind. Della came out a little later, her shawl drawn close. Do you ever get tired of the quiet? She asked, watching the sky shift to stars. No, he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, not anymore. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking, just letting the dark settle around them like a promise. And Thunder, who had spent years convinced the land would be enough, felt something shift deep under his ribs like the ground itself had made room for one more. The morning after Walter first took broth standing up, Thunder found Della out by the edge of the pasture, her skirt hem brushing the tops of the wild oats. She was still, arms folded loosely, watching the cattle graze where the land dipped toward the creek. Thunder approached without calling out. She turned at the sound of his boots, her expression unreadable. You always rise with the sun, she asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Usually earlier, he said, but I didn't hear the hens this morning. I let them out already. Thought I'd try doing something useful. You did, he said. They're quieter when they're fed, her mouth curved, though not quite a smile. I grew up with chickens, but Pa never had much land. Dirt was too thin where we lived. Thunder glanced toward the hills. So where was home before the road? Northwest of Lawrence, Kansas side. My father worked with a wheelwright near the Caw. He nodded, then paused. You miss it? Della looked out across the field where a few cottonwoods leaned into the wind. No, not anymore. Too many memories that stayed sharp. Thunder didn't push. He waited, and after a moment she spoke again. My mother died there. Cold took her in early spring. Afterward, everything felt like it had been hollowed out. He shifted his weight. I lost my brother in the war. Came home and couldn't find anything that looked the same. Della turned toward him. Is that why you came west, in part? I needed ground that didn't remind me of what was gone. She was quiet for a beat. And did you find it? He looked at her. Some of it, the rest. Maybe I'm finding now. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the edge of her shawl. She didn't move to adjust it. Instead, she looked straight at him, brows drawn in thought. My father asked me last night what I planned to do, whether I'd go to Rock Springs like we said. Thunder waited. I told him I didn't know, that I'd seen something here I hadn't expected, a kind of stillness I didn't think existed anymore. He spoke carefully. What did he say? He said life doesn't always ask for our permission before it turns. She paused. Then he asked if I trusted you. Thunder swallowed. And do you? Della stepped closer, her voice low. I trust you more than anyone I've met in the last 5 years. They stood in silence after that. A hawk circled high above, its wings catching the light. Below, the cattle shifted among the grasses, tails flicking. Later that day, Thunder rode out to check the fence along the southern edge. When he returned near dusk, Della was in the garden beside the house, kneeling in the dirt with her palms dark from planting. A few neat rows of onions stretched behind her. She glanced up as he approached. I found seed in the shed, thought it might take in this soil. He crouched beside her. You've got a good eye for spacing, my mother taught me. Said a garden's like a promise you care for it, and it feeds you back. Thunder looked down at the row. You planning to stay long enough to see it grow? She didn't answer right away. Then, if I did, would that be all right? He met her gaze. It would. That night, they sat on the porch after Walter had turned in. The stars were out in full, and the air held the cool edge of coming autumn. Thunder passed her a tin cup of coffee, and she took it without a word. He spoke first. I've never lived with anyone before. It's always been just me, the land, and the work. Della turned toward him. And how does it feel now that that's changed? Like I'd been waiting for it without knowing. She nodded slowly. I'm not the sort to rush decisions, but I don't want to leave this place. And I don't want to wonder what could have been if I stayed. He set his cup down. You don't have to wonder. She reached out then, hand covering his. Her grip was firm, warm. I came here by accident, but I think I was meant to find you. Thunder closed his fingers around hers. And I think I was meant to answer that road. They sat that way a long time, hands joined, the porch creaking beneath them with the wind, and for the first time since they'd met, nothing needed saying. Everything was already understood. The next week stretched out warm and clear, the air dry enough to lift the scent of pine from the ridge above the creek. Thunder worked the cattle closer to the eastern pasture, where the grass still held some green. Della split her time between tending her father and setting small things in order, a wash line strung straighter, a cracked window pane patched with oilcloth, a kitchen shelf cleared and neatly rearranged. Walter gained strength steadily. He sat upright most days now, wrapped in Thunder's old wool coat, watching the midday light move across the floor. "You've built something honest here," he said one afternoon as Della helped him settle into a chair by the hearth. "I can see how a man might come to love it," Thunder nodded. "It's been good to me, gave me purpose after I thought I'd run out." Walter studied him for a long beat. "You've been alone here long, since I first rode in. Never had a reason to change that." Walter looked toward the window where Della was outside hanging herbs to dry. "Maybe now you do." Thunder didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the edge of the curtain, and outside Della tucked a sprig of sage into the twine with careful hands. "I'm not one to rush things," Thunder said finally. Walter's mouth tugged upward. "Neither is she. But she knows when something's worth staying for." 2 days later, Della rode with Thunder to the trading post. Thunder hitched the wagon while she stepped inside to look at bolts of muslin and a jar of elderberry cordial. When she came back out, her arms full of wrapped parcels, Thunder lifted them easily into the back. "You've got plans," he said, brushing dust from his sleeve. "I do," she said without hesitation. "Your pantry's near empty and that back bedroom's never been cleaned proper." "I didn't know it needed to be. It does now." On the ride back, the wind turned cooler. Della pulled her shawl tighter, eyes on the horizon. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Thunder kept one hand loose on the reins. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about the next day's work and whether the calves are gaining weight. I think about it more lately." Her voice gentled. "What a day might look like when there isn't something to outrun." He looked at her fully then, the lines of her face quiet but sure. "And what do you see?" "I see a door left open. A kettle on the stove, someone beside me who doesn't need to ask if I belong." Thunder didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "You'd have that here." She didn't look away. "I know." When they returned, Walter was sitting on the porch with a book open in his lap. His eyes tracked them as they stepped down from the wagon. "I take it we're staying on," he said without preamble. Della smiled. "If Thunder's willing." Walter turned his gaze on Thunder. "You ready to keep company, son?" Thunder met his eyes. "I am, sir." That night they ate bread still warm from the oven and a stew that tasted of thyme and salt pork. Afterward, Della brought a basket of mending to the porch while Thunder sharpened his blade under the lantern light. "I've been thinking," she said, threading her needle. "There's a grove at the far edge of the property, birch trees and wildflowers. I saw it last week." "I know the one," Thunder said. "Good spot when the breeze is right." She nodded once. "If a woman were to stand there in a plain dress and a man were to speak a vow beside her, I think it might hold." He paused in his work, the whetstone still in his hand. "You asking me for something, Della?" "I'm offering," she said. "You've given us steadiness and shelter. I'd like to give you my name if you want it." He set the blade down and stood, walked to where she sat and knelt beside her. "I want it," he said, voice low. "I want you beside me, planting seed and lighting lamps and seeing the seasons through." She reached out and cupped his face, thumb brushing the line of his jaw. "Then it's done." They married 5 days later, beneath the birch grove with Walter steady on his feet and 3 neighbors standing witness. Della wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn from a bolt she found in the bottom of Thunder's cedar trunk. Thunder wore his cleanest shirt and a wildflower tucked behind his ear, courtesy of the neighbor's daughter. There were no grand words. Just hands joined, eyes held, and vows spoken as the wind stirred the leaves above them. Afterward, they shared bread and coffee on the porch, and Della rested her head against Thunder's shoulder as the sky slipped toward dusk. No one spoke of what had come before. There was only the sound of the land settling for the night, and the quiet certainty that from that moment on, nothing would be done alone. Late September brought a gold softness to the hills, the sun mellowing into a gentler light that lingered longer over the grass. The mornings were colder now, breath curling in front of their mouths while they hauled water and fed the animals. Della had taken to wearing Thunder's scarf looped twice around her neck, the wool scratchy but warm, and he never asked for it back. Walter had taken over the smokehouse, sitting on a stool while he cleaned and packed the last of the summer meat. He worked slow but steady, insisting on pulling his own weight. Thunder let him, though he kept an eye from a distance, just in case the older man's balance failed him. Inside the house, Della had begun setting the root cellar in order. She kept lists in her head, and when Thunder asked who all she was feeding, she just said, "Winter doesn't wait for anyone," and he let her be. She moved with a kind of quiet foresight, now checking hinges, oiling the lanterns, laying quilts out to air by the creek. Watching her, Thunder started to see the place not as something he kept alive, but something he shared. One afternoon, while he was repairing the fencing near the north slope, Della rode up on Jasper, her braid tucked under a bonnet, basket looped over one arm. "You forgot your lunch," she said, passing down the bread and dried apples. He leaned on the post, brushing sweat from his brow. "You didn't have to come all this way. You didn't come back when you said you would. I figured either you were starving or you'd fallen asleep standing. You figured right," he said, biting into the bread. "Fence is worse than I thought." A bull must have broken through sometime last week. She dismounted and walked the length of the broken rail. "You'll need locust posts if you want it to hold through the snow." He looked up. "You know wood types, my grandfather taught me. He was Osage. Grew up building lodges long before my mother ran off to Kansas." She crouched beside the broken post, fingers brushing the splintered edge. He said, "Locust bends but doesn't break." Thunder set the bread aside, watching her. "You never mentioned him before." "I didn't know if it mattered." "It does." She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "He taught me how to read the land, said you don't own it, you borrow it from the ones who come after." Thunder nodded. "Sounds like someone I'd have liked. You'd have gotten along." They stood in silence, the kind that didn't ask for filling. Then she turned to him. "Do you ever think about what it would be like raising children out here?" He blinked. "You mean ours?" She didn't look away. "I've seen the way you are with the calves. Careful, patient. You'd make a good father." He looked down at his hands, calloused and worn from years of work. "I never let myself picture that before you." And now, he reached for her hand, his grip sure. "Now I can't see anything else." She smiled, slow and steady. "Then maybe we ought to start planning for more than just the winter." That night, Walter sat at the table carving a set of wooden spoons for the kitchen. Della stirred a pot of beans on the stove, humming under her breath. Thunder leaned against the doorway, watching them with a quiet fullness in his chest he hadn't known he could feel. When the meal was done and the lamps were low, Thunder took Della's hand and led her outside. The stars spread thick above them. The air held the sharp bite of early frost. "There's a grove not far from the ridge," he said. "Level ground, good soil. I was thinking." She tilted her head. "Thinking what?" "That maybe come spring we plant something more permanent there, a home just for us. So your father can stay in the house and we'll have room to grow." She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped close and rested her forehead to his. "I'd like that more than anything." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her in until there was no space left between them. The weight of the past, the fear of the uncertain, all of it fell away under the hush of the wind and the certainty of her in his arms. Over the following weeks, they began gathering what they'd need: salvaged beams from a barn downed in a storm, stones from the creek, nails traded for at the post. They worked side by side, the rhythm of their days folding one into the next. The land, once a place of solitude, now echoed with two sets of footsteps, and the sound of laughter carried on the wind. By early November, the first snow fell in soft sheets, and the cabin walls stood firm, the roof not yet shingled but framed strong. They paused work for the season, but the foundation was there, solid and waiting. Inside the main house, Della sat near the fire, knitting a small cap from leftover wool. Thunder came in from the cold, shaking snow from his shoulders. She looked up, eyes bright. "You're going to need to build a crib soon," she said. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, resting a hand over hers. "You're sure?" she nodded, tears catching at the corners of her lashes. "Spring, if all goes well." He kissed her, slow and certain. "Then we'll be ready." By the time the snow deepened and the days shrank short, the three of them had settled into a kind of rhythm that felt like it had always been their meals shared, work divided, evenings spent with quiet talk and warm quilts. Walter took to whittling toys when his hands weren't too stiff, and Della sang softly while she sewed. The old griefs didn't vanish, but they softened, made room for the new. Thunder walked the pastures each morning with a full heart, knowing that when he returned, there would be light in the window and a hand to hold. By spring, the cabin was finished, and the garden bloomed in neat rows behind it. Della gave birth in mid-April, her labor long but steady. Thunder never left her side, his hand clasped in hers through every hour. At dawn, their daughter arrived quiet at first, then strong-voiced and pink-cheeked. They named her Lark for the bird Della had heard singing just before the pain began. Years passed. Seasons turned. The house grew fuller, the land more generous. Thunder taught Lark how to saddle a horse before she turned 8. Della showed her the names of every wildflower that grew near the ridge. Walter passed on before Lark was grown, his grave shaded by the same birch trees where her parents had spoken their vows. And through it all, Thunder and Della remained steady as the hills, sure as the sun. Not untouched by hardship, but bound by a love that had been earned with every shared silence, every hard-won moment of trust. They grew old together, hands still clasped on the porch as the sky burned gold and the wind carried the scent of sage over the grass. And every evening, as the shadows lengthened, they turned to each other with the same quiet certainty they'd found that first day on the road, always home, always together.